So today, what I was thinking to just talk about, because I know you were really interested in last time we had this in Pixie
Yeah.
Boot and
Yes.
understanding the whole concept of Pixie Boot and how that works. So I have a nice lab here that we'll be using. So first of all, let me quit this. So what that looks like is I have a client here, which is a test client machine.
Mm.
And I have a UTM here, which I like very much. So this is my Sophos UTM. Have you ever used any Sophos products before at all?
No,
Yeah,
but recently I was watching, videos about Surface firewall or
yeah,
threat management, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, this one. So that's what I use in this lab. So I'm using the Sophos UTM here in this lab. So I like it very
Is
much.
it is
It's
it a virtual
yeah,
device or
yeah.
physical one?
So you can get physical. I have a physical one at home, but I
Mm.
also have virtual ones. So you can get virtual ones. So if I want to use the virtual one in my environment for an home user, it's free.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
but it's an enterprise level. You get firewall and stuff like that. UTM. So for example, I can go to my IP address HTTPS 192.168.2.130 and go to port 4444. So which is what I'll be using for like the demonstration today, because it shows like a feel of an enterprise level firewall, right? If I go, and this is what I'll be using to show in configuring DHCP relay and all that stuff. And now I'm logged into it and all kinds of stuff, and I can practice. I'm even thinking of I'll even do like a series of not Hangout but recordings that I'll post on YouTube about and this, because it's really good. It's got some really good features and all that stuff. Okay, so that's the lab that we'll be using. So we'll be using this lab where we have this client. It's connected to this switch. Then it's sitting behind this firewall. And the whole picture is what I'm bringing up this one. So thinking about it and helping us to break it down, it's where we have a client here that will be pixie booting via config manager to do our OS deployment. And the same way you have in an enterprise, because what you have in an enterprise is you have your user devices connecting to these closet switches, right? So they're connecting to these access level switches or these closet switches, and that closet switch is somehow connecting to like a multi-layer switch or a router somewhere in the data center or in the closet somewhere. And at the same time, you have your server access or server distribution switches or server access switches that are connecting your servers together. Definitely, most people don't use physical servers like this anyway. They use virtual servers. But any which way, they're still connected by either virtual switches or physical switches. They're connected. And at some point, that connection goes up to the same multi-layer switch or the same router somewhere in your data center or closet. So that's like what we'll be trying to do, is trying to break this down to see what exactly is going on when we're doing pixie booting. What components of config manager are required to get this working? Because one of the things that we've mentioned like a little bit in this series, maybe not as much as we should, is that there are lots of components. So there are a lot of components um, that are required for OS deployment to work properly in config manager. So there are a lot of components that are required, and um, one of the components, of course, we know we have to have a config manager site, and that means the config manager site server. But at the same time, we have to have a management point. At the same time, we have to have a distribution point configured. Distribution point. And then the thing is, if we're going to be doing Pixie boot, we have to have a distribution point installed
Enabled.
and configured. Yeah, exactly. Nice. And with Pixie boot, with Pixie enabled, right? So there are a lot of components here. And at the same time, we have to have DHCP services in the infrastructure. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we have our boot images, right? Because if we're going to be doing pixie booting, the machine has to boot an image. So you have to have your boot images properly configured. And I'll explain what I mean by properly configured. Our boot images properly configured. And at the same time, we have to have our OS
Network
images.
access.
You said network address.
Network access account.
Network, oh yeah, that's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So the network access account. And what's the purpose of the network access account?
To access the shared for the OS and the deployments.
To access the shared folder. Is it a shared folder?
Yeah,
Which shared folder?
the the shared folder which has the OS images.
Yep, it has. There's a particular name that it's called in Config Manager.
Net
I know you.
installation share or
It's called the content library, right?
yeah, content
Yeah,
library. Okay.
it's called the content library in Config Manager. So because in Config Manager 2007, it's just a pure um, shared folder. But in Config Manager 2012, it's more than a shared folder because because there's a lot more complexity with it. Because it uses this thing called single file. What's it called? Let's keep my mind now. It's called single file storage, something like that. And what that does is like it's a form of deduplication, where if you have Windows 10 being stored on your distribution point, so you're distributing to your distribution point, and you have lots of different Windows 10 images being distributed, it will actually store no, it's not single file, it's called single instance storage. It will actually store the files only one time and just put pointers to it so that it doesn't have to store it many times just to save some space. So it's something that if you just go single instance storage in config manager, it's something that this is so single instance storage, ability to keep one copy of content, and it's something that if you go single instance storage config manager 2012, so it's usually, so you say SCCM content library, and then they will actually go into details of what actually. So I think it's this blog. So this blog is really good to explain what's actually going on in the content library and how it works. And you see the content library, and then they mention the fact that it basically just stores the files once. In a different way from SCCM 2007, we just use a pure shared folder. This one is a bit more. So you see all these different folders, and they're doing pointers and all kinds of stuff. But that's for another time. So yeah, absolutely accurate. Network access account. What else do we need?
Okay.
We need our OS images also, because that's what we'll be deploying. Um, what else do we need?
ADK.
Yeah, absolutely. So properly configured. So from Windows ADK. So that's what Windows ADK. That's what will be used to create these original boot images that we'll be using. What else do we need? We need hardware drivers, right? Also.
Yes, the
So
drivers.
yeah. So we need a hard. So there's a lot of components. Looking at this, there's a lot of places. There's a lot of components involved, and what that means is that there's a lot of places where there could be potential issues with OS deployment in Config Manager. If one is not careful and follow the steps properly. So, but just something to note. Okay, so what we would first do in this case, what we'll do to begin with is let's bring up that lab environment here. This one, and what I'll do is I'll go here and I'll reset this machine and allow it to do a pixie boot, and then we'll see. So I have a Wireshark capture going on here. So I like using this tool. I'm not sure if you've seen this tool before. So it's GNS3.
Yeah, GNS3.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So it's a really nice tool for mainly used by people in networking. My background is in networking, so I like using it. But then the good thing, the good thing I like about it, I like using this for my Microsoft studies because of this particular feature of I can capture between links. So I really like this ability to be able to capture what's going on between these links. So I like using this for my labs rather than this, because this is VirtualBox. This is a VirtualBox machine, which is this one. And I have it connecting to that. So I can just go right click, start capture, and see what's going on that link. So because that's what we want to see today. We want to actually see behind the scene what exactly is going on. So let's bring this up. Let's go machine, reset this, and I'll press F12 and I'll go L to boot from LAN. And there we go. DHCP kicking in, contacting server gateway. Press F12. I press F12, and then Pixie boot start. Okay. So that's why that's going on. What we'll now do is we'll try to investigate exactly what has happened in the background, or what is currently happening in the background. And let's bring up this scenario again. So typically in your environment, right, you have this kind of setup. You have this client connecting to switches, servers connecting to switches. When a Pixie boot happens, so from your own understanding, maybe we should start from there. From your own understanding, what happens when Pixie boot, when you power on the machine to do Pixie boot, what's going on? What's like the, can you go step 1, step 2, step 3? What exactly is going on?
Okay, first the client machine will send a broadcast message
Okay,
to get the
nice.
IP address.
Excellent. So the client machine will send a
Then
broadcast
yeah,
to,
then the
yeah.
DHCP will reply with the IP address.
So let's pause here for a minute. So because there's different scenarios, because one scenario is this. So one scenario is I have this machine on this network. So rather than this machine be on a separate network, separated by a router or a firewall or something, this machine is actually directly connected to this network. So in that case, what you're saying that where the machine sends a broadcast and the broadcast will get to DHCP server. But what happens, so that's absolutely correct. But what happens in a situation when there's a firewall or a router, which is typically the case in organizations where you have a firewall and a router between the client network and the server network? What happens in this case when there's a router between the client network and the server network?
I don't think so. The router will pass the broadcast request, I guess.
Yeah, so what will now happen in that case? So what kind of setup will you need for this to work?
DHCP relay.
Excellent. So you need to have DHCP relay. And on the DHCP relay, what would the configuration be?
Um, the information for option for the Pixie boot.
And no, so you're talking about DHCP relay. So DHCP relay is on the router, right? On the default gateway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So what would that configuration be on the, because DHCP relay is simple. DHCP relay is a simple configuration. So we won't be going, because it just be you need to tell your network guy, right, in your office, that network guy, can you please configure DHCP relay, for this network. But what you have to be, we will have to be the one at the Windows guy to tell him what to configure, because he has no idea what we're talking about when we're talking about config manager. So DHCP relay is simply saying any DHCP packets from this network send to this server. So that's
Okay.
what you're configuring DHCP relay. Any DHCP packet from this network sent to this server. Which server will you tell your network guy to
The
configure?
DHCP.
The DHCP server. Only the DHCP server, or anything else?
Um,
Is it
I'm
only the
not sure the
DHCP
DHCP.
server? Anything else that you tell him to?
DNS.
Not DNS, no. So again, remember, this is just DHCP. So it's saying any DHCP packet from this network sent to this. So you're right in saying DHCP server. And actually, you can
And WDS?
yeah, exactly. And WDS. And WDS in this case is what?
It should be the distribution point.
Exactly, your distribution point. So because there's nothing stopping the network guy from configuring multiple servers on this DHCP relay to say any DHCP packet that comes in, send it to DHCP server, send it also to distribution point.
Mhm.
So there's nothing. So if you want, you can specify 10 different servers. And what this router will just do is that once this packet is coming in, or once this packet comes in here, it just goes, hey, there's a DHCP packet coming in from this network. I've been configured to send it to DHCP and to distribution point. Therefore, I'll just do duplicate this packet, send one to the DHCP server, send the other one to distribution point. And what's the reason why you do this? What's the reason why you say not only DHCP server, but DHCP server and distribution point? Why? Because this is where
Uh,
we're trying to go in and try to understand exactly what's going on. So why would we say don't send it to only the DHCP server, send it also to the distribution point? What's the reason?
because there will be a communication between the distribution point and the client during the OS deployment.
Excellent. That's absolutely excellent. There will also be a communication. And what sort of communication is that?
Mm, the Bixby boot?
Yeah, exactly. So that's absolute. So I mean, that's really really great, Abdul. Really really great answer. So here's the deal: is that yeah, this is a machine with no operating system that's booting up, right?
Mhm.
So it's sending a DHCP packet, but you know the DH. Here's one of the first thing to remember is that the DHCP packet that it's sending, it's not like any other ordinary DHCP packet. It has an option that it is included in this DHCP packet that this guy is sending. So he said, I'm sending this DHCP packet, right? Or this DHCP broadcast packet. Let's put it that way. This is a broadcast packet. But within the DHCP broadcast packet, there's an option that it's going to enable. That option is called option 60. So you don't need to know this offhand, but it's just something to understand. So let's see what's actually happening when we bring up our lab again. So here's the client, right? 000 because it has no IP address. And it's sending a broadcast to 255.255.255 and it's saying, can you see the screen or should I try to zoom it a bit?
Yeah, I can see it. It's okay.
You can see it. Okay. So it's sending a broadcast to 255.255.255, right? And it's the first DHCP discover, right? In the DORA process, the discover offer request. So sending DHCP discover. So if you dig down, look at it, of course, DHCP source port of the client is port 68. It's sending to destination port 67. What does that mean? What that means is any server that's listening on port 67 will reply to me, right? That's what that means is I'm sending it to destination port 67. But if you actually dig down in that boot P packet, on that DHCP packet, and you keep looking down, you see this option here called option 60, right? You can see this option 60, right? Is it something that you can see, or is it not clear? This one, option 60 here. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Vendor class identifier.
Yes. And if you look within it, what's it saying? Pixie client.
Bixby client.
So this is very vital because this is what identifies to the server that this client that is contacting me is not just contacting me to get an IP address. This client that is contacting me needs to be able to boot. That's why it's contacting me. So it needs some information about how do I boot up. So option 60 is what's included. So if you think about our diagram again, in this case, the packet goes to the DHCP server. DHCP server can only supply, let's say by default, we'll talk about the other scenario after. DHCP server can only supply the IP address, right? And the network configuration. It won't be able to supply information about the boot, how to boot, right? But that same DHCP packet comes to the distribution point, which is also like it's using WDS behind the scene. And when it gets that packet, it sees option 60 and says, oh, I need to give this guy information about how to boot up. So in other words, there will be two replies to this guy. There will be a reply. Sorry, let's get, no, that's not the right one. There's going to be a reply from DHCP as to this is how to boot up. I'm sorry, this is the network address for you. And there will also be a reply from the distribution point of this is the information you need to be able to boot up. So that is the ideal scenario or the normal scenario. Now, there's another scenario of what happens if there's a limitation on your DHCP relay and you can only configure one server. So in other words, this DHCP relay has a limitation. You can only point and say any DHCP packet coming from this network, point it to this one server. Does that mean you're stuck? No. So any DHCP packet that's coming again, because this one can only accept a configuration of one server, that means you won't be able to say send it to this guy so that this guy can reply with network information, but also send it to this guy because this guy using DHCP, the same bootp protocol that DHCP is using, this guy will use it to supply the boot information. But because now in this case we're limited because of this network device, which if I show you is the situation with my own internal firewall, my own internal Sophos firewall. I know that the limitation has been taken away in newer models. So this limitation has been going away. Because if I go here and I go under DHCP services, right? And I go under DHCP relay, I can say any DHCP packet coming in from these networks, point it to this DHCP server. But do you see the limitation? I can only specify one DHCP server. I can't
Yes.
specify two.
You cannot add more server.
Yeah, but in almost every situation, you can specify more than one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a limitation of this particular version that I'm running. So if I have a newer version of this Sophos UTM, you can specify more than one DHCP server. In which case, you just specify more than one DHCP server. Actually, if you just go online, if you're using like a Cisco router or so, you could go Cisco. I actually have a YouTube video on this Cisco router configure DHCP relay. I think I have a YouTube video on this, and it's really straightforward, simple. You go and you have the command to configure it, and the command is IP helper address this, but you can specify more than one. So you can go
Yes.
IP helper address this one, so you can specify your DHCP server, and at the same time just go back and say IP helper address distribution point. So you're specifying more than one DHCP server. You're specifying multiple DHCP servers. So
Okay.
you can. So, but in that case where you have a limitation, or in a case where maybe you're not friendly with your network guy, you know, you don't want to go and be talking to him that, hey, we've just
It
put this
happens.
yeah, you know, it may happen. And you don't want to go to your network guy to say, hey, I know you've already configured DHCP relay on this network to forward to the DHCP server, but also can you also add the distribution point to that relay configuration? You know, maybe you don't want to do that. So what you could do is option number 2. So let's go back to the options that we've been pointing out. So we said option number 1 is configure the DHCP relay to forward DHCP packets to both the DHCP server and the distribution point. In this case, that's the Windows Deployment Services. That's what it's using in the backend. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is configure the DHCP relay to forward DHCP packets to only the DHCP server, and then
the DHCP server,
configure the DHCP server to point to the distribution point as its TFTP server, and so that is option 66, I think. Option 66, and to point to the WDS MBP file, which is option 67, I think. But let's see. So that's the other option. So in a case where you're limited for whatever reason, you can just point to your DHCP server. But now go on your DHCP server, which if I go on mine here, so this is my SCCM server. Let's bring that to this side. Let's go to the yep, here we go. So this is the DHCP server. So what I've now done for this scope is said right click, configure scope options, and I've now gone down, and you see options 66 and 67 down here. Boot server host name, which is your TFTP boot server host name. So I've put in the IP address of my distribution point. Yeah, but at the same time, it's saying I need the boot file name, and I've put the option for the boot file name. So here's my next question to you. What's the boot file name? Where in the world is that boot file name? What's it doing?
boot file name, what it will do?
Yeah, what's this one? So because again, look at this. Because you have to configure both. If you configure just option 66, it won't work. It has to know option 66, and it has to know which file should I download to begin the boot process. So normally this information will be supplied by the distribution point itself, right? Normally. But in this case, because you have a situation where you can't send DHCP packets to your distribution point, you are having to configure this on the DHCP server itself. So, but we know exactly what this one is doing. What option 66 is doing, right? That's our distribution point. That's your TFTP boot server name, because TFTP is what it's going to use for the download. But what's this boot file name? What's this wdsmbp.com SMS boot x64? What in the world is this?
I'm not sure, but maybe it will send the boot file to the client, or the client will use this file to boot up.
Yeah, so you're right. It's gonna use this file to boot up. Let me try to so if I go back to the SCCM server, so here's one thing I will advise to go to is look up online this information about the remote install folder. Because if you're using WDS normally, WDS has this remote install folder. Now, what usually happens is you're gonna have this remote install folder. Once you enable the distribution point, once you enable it for Pixie booting, it's gonna create these extra folders inside the remote install folder. So, for example, you can see normally under WDS you have boot, images, management, right? You have boot, images, and management. But if you look under this one, you've got SMS boot, SMS images, SSMS temp. Now, all these ones are the ones that were created by Config Manager.
Okay.
So because by me going here and saying when I'm configuring this distribution point, when I first started installing it, for example, if I go maybe I go to a server and I go add a site system role to this server. Maybe I want to make this server a distribution point or whatever. Or maybe I'm even adding a new site system server, which I just go right click and say create site system server, and I'm going and I go type in the name of whatever dot com um, and go. I'm not going to actually be configuring anything just to demo. So go distribution point and go next. And then it has this option. So I can specify the option to install HIS and branch cache, which would be useful. But then when I start going down, in the configuration process. And when I get to Pixie settings, it says enable Pixie support for client, but now it says WDS will be installed if required. So once I click on this, is the config manager will actually install WDS on that server. But as part of that, it's going to add all these extra folders into the remote install folder. So what we are pointing to is we're pointing to SMS boot, right? X64 wds.mbp. Again, this is like a whole series on its own on information about the content of the remote install folder, what they all mean. So basically, what this file is an application, the file that it's downloading. And what this
Mm-hmm.
file is doing is that the client will run this file. It's a really lightweight file. You can see it's an application, but it's 31
30
kilobytes.
KB.
Yeah. So it's going to run this application to determine information about the client, like what's the architecture. Is it 64-bit? Is it 32-bit? So after getting all those information, so it's going to run this program, use it to collect information about the client, send that
Okay.
information over to the distribution point, and distribution point will now be able to say, this is your boot image. This is based on this is your architecture and stuff like that. So WDS MBP is just a file that detects the hardware architecture of the machine, and the information will now be used by config manager to make the decision. Is that clear or is that confusing?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
clear, very
so
clear.
that's what that file, that WDS MBP that we're pointing to in DHCP, that's what that file. So it's something that will kick up the process. But because, for example, you don't want to just point and say, or assuming, let's say there's an option where we can specify this is the image that you're going to boot. What happens if we boot a machine that's only 32-bit? Yeah, you get the
Mm.
point. That what happens, and that brings us to another point. Because many,
Again, please. But
sorry.
what's the point you mentioned about 32-bit?
The 32-bit, yeah, you can still have 32-bit operating system or sorry, 32-bit hardware. Or what you asked? What's the question? Sorry, I missed the question.
No, you were talking about 32-bit.
Yeah.
What will happen with the 32-bit? But I was thinking about something else, but I didn't get it.
No. So for example, now this one would detect the hardware architecture, right? If the hardware
Yes.
architecture is 32-bit, it's gonna boot with the 32-bit boot image. If the
Okay.
hardware architecture is 64-bit, it's gonna boot with a
64.
64-bit boot image. So that leads to
Ah,
one
okay.
other thing. One other thing is that to
Oh,
remember is this,
mhm.
is that whenever you're setting up, because one of the components you need is your boot images. Whenever you're setting up your boot images, you have to not only set up your boot images, you have to enable them to be on the distribution point, to be available on the distribution point. If I go on the software library and I go under boot images, I see my boot images here. I have to go to the boot image under
Distribute.
properties. And no, apart from distribute, so like this one, I've not even, so apart from distribute, I have to go under properties here. And under properties here, you see this option here under
Optional option component.
no, not even that one. There's an option where customization, this one.
Okay.
Is it this one? No, not this one. Data source. Oh, okay. Under data source, under this one, you see this option here.
For your
Important.
boot.
The deploy this boot image from the Pixie enabled distribution point. Once I tick this option, do you know what happens? Again, back to the
It will
remote.
not.
So, because if I distribute it, it's available on the distribution point, but it doesn't mean it's available for Pixie boot client. If I say deploy this boot image from Pixie enabled distribution point, then if I go back here under the remote install folder, right? If I go back under SMS images, and you see these are all the boot images that I've made available on Pixie enabled distribution point. If I've not ticked this, it's not going to be here. So if I look at this one, for example, this one is UK 20,000 and C, right? And you can see UK 20,000 and C here. It's because I have this option here. If I don't want to do this now because it's just going to take a while. Actually, I could. If I go untick this option here, yeah, deploy this boot image from this Pixie enabled distribution point and click apply. And let's see what happens. So if I go in here, for example, I can see the WIM file there, right? And then let's see what happens. So that option is, this option is very important. And the reason why I brought this up is that you have to have at least one 64-bit boot image and at least one 32-bit boot image enabled for Pixie boot. Otherwise, no Pixie booting will work. So can you say that it's disappeared now?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
disappeared now.
disappeared.
So that is why this option is important, because if this is what you want to be used, you have to enable it to be available on the for Pixie booting and apply, and then it's going to go and it's going to be available here for booting. But again, remember this point that I made, because I was caught out by this, is that if you just enable, if you're thinking, oh, I'm not only going to be using 64-bit computers, so I don't need to put any 32-bit boot image to be enabled for Pixie boot. You're not going to be able to boot both 32-bit and 64-bit computers, because both architecture has to be available. So it's back again. Both architecture has to be available before you're going to be able to boot anything. That's very vital, because if I go, for example, if I search for both 32-bit and 64-bit images, boot images needed, because I got caught out by this in my own production environment. Um, and you'll be like, let's see, Pixie boot option posted in. Okay, let's see, maybe this one. Let's see. So there's like maybe much needed for Pixie. Maybe this one or another one. Because it's important to note that one, because that one can catch you out. Let's see. Aha, okay, look at this. So maybe this is another good one. So look at this person that had a problem and says, I have config manager 2012, but this same problem occurred with Service Pack 1. The main issue is that 32-bit hardware clients are pulling 64-bit boot images. If I move 64-bit boot image from DP, everything works fine, but then 64-bit hardware will stay pending for 64-bit boot image forever. So that means without checking around the boot image and stuff like that. Maybe not exactly this one. Don't remove 64-bit boot image from the DP. It must remain there. In your TAs, set the boot image for the TAs to be 32-bit boot image. For the Pixie boot, you may need to re-advertise. But yeah, this one is not even as clear as there's like a one that I saw. So basically, just remember that advertise both 32-bit and 64-bit boot images on your distribution point by ticking that option, this option, on your boot image. So remember that. Okay, so now that we've,
Okay.
yeah,
Can you go back to that
um,
page?
this one. This one.
So
Yep.
yeah, no. The properties of the boot image.
Ah, okay. So
I
let's go
want to
back.
ask you about something.
Okay, no problems. On the yeah, on the which one?
Can you go to optional component?
Yeah, yeah, this one.
Go to add new, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and go to HTML.
This one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did this step in the Microsoft Virtual Lab, but I didn't get what's the point of using this file. Do you have any idea about this?
So it depends. So for example, there's like different type of deployment. So we probably won't be going into that, but there's different types of deployment. One of the type of deployment you have is you can have something called, like the one we mentioned last week, the user UDI, UDI wizard, user driven installation, where the user gets a page where they can select. Remember, do you remember this one?
Yeah, I
Where
remember.
the user can select. So you know what this one is using? It's using XML, HTML. So, but what can happen is I can build my own instead of using this one by Microsoft. I can build my own. So, for
Okay.
example, if I say go to custom UDI, so maybe not like if I go under images, you see different custom ones that are not even the Microsoft ones that people have built by themselves. So custom UDI wizard. So ones that are not even like Microsoft built ones, but ones that users have built themselves using HTML. So if you want to use something like that, you have to enable HTML in your boot image because you're going to be running that to collect information from within the boot image.
Mhm.
So that's why you need something like this, like the
Okay.
HTML. So because that provides HTML support. Um, just as if you want to run PowerShell storage WMI commandlet from within WinPE, you must enable this option and add it there. So that's where, so for example, if I go custom, um, let's see, HTA SCCM. Okay, so maybe this one. Aha, okay, look at this. So if I go under images, can you see this? So these are custom HTAs that different people have built by themselves, and they're using HTML to build this. So collect variables via HTA. So I'm working with an HTA front end. So HTA just simply means HTML application. So I'm building an HTA. So people can build, so you can see. So here's a guy that has built his own custom HTA, right? And he can use this to collect information and before the building begins, and it will now use the variables in the task sequence. But the
Mm.
thing that is built to use this one, so this is actually based on HTML, but they are called HTA because they are HTML applications. But if you're going to be using something like that, then you need this to be enabled, because otherwise it's not going to be able to run the thing you want it to run. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, now it's clear.
Yeah. So like there's like lots of components that we can add, like and stuff. So this is where this one is also important because you know that for all your hardware models you must add the network and and storage drivers inside drivers. You know that, right?
Mm.
So this is very important because again, what are we doing when we're doing operating system deployment? This machine will load up with because it doesn't have an operating system, it's going to load up with WinPE, right? But then when
Okay.
it loads up with WinPE, it's going to be using WinPE to interact with the distribution point and management point, which is one of the reasons why the other one that you talked about, the network access account, why it's necessary. Because this machine is not joined to the domain, right? But it's going to be downloading information from this content library. How will he have access to download information from the content library? He's going to use the network access account to be downloading information from the content library and stuff like that because this machine is not joined to the domain. But again, the every thing is doing from within WinPE. So what that means is that your network adapter and your storage adapter drivers, both of them have to be inside that WinPE image. Because otherwise, it's not going to be able to enable the network adapter for network connection. And it's not going to be able to enable the storage on the machine to format the disk, to partition the disk. So it's one of the things that you have to do is that when you're adding your drivers, so I can go here and I can add import and can go to import driver, and I can go to, for example, I showed you the one that we can go download from Lenovo's website or Dell's website. They already have all the package in a particular folder. All I need to do is point to that folder here, and SCCM will handle the importing for me. But what I now have to do is I have to go to my boot image. And actually, I'm thinking, should I even show you this one? So let me. Do you want me? Is this something that you already know how to do, or is it something that will be useful for you?
You can go for it, please.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to Lenovo SCCM driver packages, and let's get one Lenovo SCCM driver package. So they have a page that actually has everything. So that's not just one
All
model.
manufacturer has these packages.
Most of, I think, majority of them, all the big ones definitely do. Dell does, Lenovo does, HP does. So because that saves you, because you don't. Okay, yeah, like look at this one for Lenovo page. They have everything, all the models, everything listed. So for example, and this is also vital because whenever you're doing something like this, Abdul, one of the things to note is that you're not only concerned about your Windows drivers, but also your WinPE drivers. That matters a lot because, for example, you have Windows ADK 10 installed on this machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Windows ADK 10 is based on Windows 10. So that means your WinPE will be, if you look at the WinPE version that we'll have here, you can see the version is the version of the Windows operating system that is based on.
Yes.
If I download Windows ADK 8.1, the version of the WinPE that will be created will be 6 point something, which is the version of Windows 8.1 operating system. So that's very
6.2, I
important.
guess.
Yes, that's very important because if I'm using WinPE 10, that means for my model, all the Windows 10 storage adapters and Windows 10 network adapter drivers has to be in that WinPE. Because if I put Windows 8.1 drivers under Windows 10 PE, it's not going to work, or it may not work. Because the way
Mm-hmm.
drivers work is the same driver that I use for Windows 8.1, it may be the same driver that is used for Windows 10, but you can't guarantee that because it may be different, right? I'm not sure is that clear at all? Because what will happen is
Yeah.
you have hardware manufacturers, they provide this hardware. So let's say this is Lenovo T440p, and what will happen is Microsoft will release Windows
Indicate
or
Windows
let's
10
say
indicate.
Microsoft releases Windows 8.1. So what
Mm-hmm.
these guys will do, what Lenovo will go to do is, okay, we have this network adapter on in Lenovo T440p called Intel Test, whatever, called Intel Test. That's the network adapter. So Intel will also do the same thing. Maybe Intel will liaise with Lenovo, they will write the driver. So what they will do is they will write the driver for Intel Test adapter, right? For Windows 8.1. That's very, very important. So they are writing it for this adapter, but also for the operating system. So what will happen is Microsoft comes out and now says, oh, we've released Windows 10. What you may find out is Lenovo and Intel tells you and
Right, and
says,
you.
yeah, they may come and say, actually, you know what? For the Intel test adapter, the same driver that is working for Windows 8.1 will also work for Windows 10. So they will say, hey, same driver as Windows 8.1 for Windows 10. Or they could come and say, actually, you know what? We've tested this driver for Windows 8.1. There's a lot of bug if you try to use it for Windows 10. So we have a completely new driver for Windows 10. So what happened is you have this boot image, right? This boot image is based on Windows 10. Yeah, it's based on Windows 10, but you only have the adapters for Windows 8.1, and you have the Intel test Windows 8.1 driver. That's the only driver that you have, and you take this driver and you insert it into this boot image, which is based on Windows 10. But it's not going to work because they have a different driver for Windows 10. So what I'm saying is that whatever your WinPE version is, that's the version of the drivers that you need to put inside it. Is that clear?
Okay, it's good. Yeah, it's clear. Simply, you will go to the manufacturer website and download
Exactly, and download it. So
the
you see,
package.
and this is where, like, I told you about the Windows 10 project that I did, and I learned a lot of lessons from it. Because one of the things I use is that some of these models here don't have Windows 10 because Lenovo has basically said we are not supporting them anymore. We're not going to be writing Windows 10 drivers for them. And then you may find out that you're not even able to boot to these machines at all. I'm currently having this in my environment where some machines, we're not even able to do Pixie boot to them at all because there's no Windows 10 drivers available for them.
Mhm.
So basically it's one of the things that you have to look at and see, is the hardware model supported, first of all, before you even start anything, and be able to tell your manager and say, hey, we have 500 machines in our environment that are not supported for Windows 10. And there's nothing we can do because there's no drivers for them. Now, the same drivers for Windows 8.1 may work for them, but it may not work. So you can't guarantee that. So yeah, so let's take an illustration, for example. So let's go Lenovo T440P that we've been talking about. Let's just download this 64-bit one. So I've just clicked on it and came here, and this is huge. Can you see 693? Wow. And I can go, actually, let me just go to it from within the virtual machine. From within this machine will be much easier for me. Let's go download it. So basically, that's the way you'll be working if you're doing it in a production environment. Also, if you go to Lenovo's website, Dell's website, look for that model, download the driver package that they have. So that may take a
I
while to
never think
download.
about it.
Yeah, I understand, because you know what? I know you went for the training, right? They won't mention
Yeah.
this in the training, I guarantee you, because I also went for the training. So it's kind of like the things that you figure out as you begin to work with the application. So as you begin to work with the application, you begin to figure out some things, and you're like, wow, okay, okay. So then it saves like the old stumbling. And also, just to give you, one that I would recommend, I would strongly recommend this book for you if you can get a hold of this book. So let me bring up my Kindle.
Okay.
So there's this book. So this book is actually like a good book because it goes into details, step by step on how to do not just the one that Microsoft are saying in their training, but a real production deployment. So it teaches how to integrate MDT with Config Manager, how to manage your drivers. So it's like if you can follow the book from top to bottom, it'll be really good. So let me bring it up and let's bring up that book. So it's written by some SCCM MVPs.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not sure so what I've basically done is I have like a Kindle, something called a Kindle subscription. Kindle subscription where I can get certain yeah, okay. Kindle subscription where I can get certain where is the enterprise client management? Maybe this one. Let's see. Enterprise client management, operating
I
system.
guess I have this book.
Do you? Okay.
I purchased it before.
Ah, nice. So it's a really good one. Like, for example, the things I'm mentioning, they mentioned it in this book, how you do your driver management properly. So make sure that you have the folder created. So it goes into details. They even give you illustration of how to download and install that of Dell M400. And you see, I've highlighted almost everything. It's a really good book. It's a really good book.
Can you back to the book title, please? I
Yes.
guess, yeah, I saw the company name.
So it's Enterprise Client
Enterprise.
Management.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I purchased from Amazon.
Ah, yeah, yeah. So that's where I got it. So actually, I don't purchase them. I just use. So there's a Kindle subscription where I have to pay £7 every month, but I can borrow
Ah,
many books. I can borrow about 10 books per month. So
okay.
that's the one I'm using for them. So yeah, so I recommend that one. So when this one finishes, then we'll do the driver import. But while it's downloading, let's go on with the things that we've been talking about. So is what we're talking about, is it clear so far? So with this one, you have to configure the DHCP server to point to the TFTP server, and then you configure the WDS MBP file, which is just a
Okay.
program that the client will download, run the program, gather information about the architecture of the
Detect
machine,
the architecture. Okay.
yes, and then
Okay.
send it up to the distribution point. The distribution point will now say, oh, based on the information that you've given to me, this is the boot image for you to use. But then at the same time, just be wary that you don't make the mistake of, I only have 64-bit machines. There's no need to enable 32-bit boot images for my distribution point. All of them
Okay.
will fail if you don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have a question about the this file which is mentioned in the DHCP option.
Yes.
It is pointing to the shared on the distribution point.
Yeah. It is. So that because again it's using WDS. So once WDS is installed, that um path is shared. So if I bring this one up and go to my SCCM server, if I go to computer management, you'll see the paths that are shared by default. So under the remote install folder, which is this one. So the remote install folder is a WDS folder that's used by SCCM. So under the remote install folder, you see SMS boot here, and you
Mm-hmm.
see this one
64.
here, yeah, x64, and then it's just pointing to this one. So which is
So
just
this is this is the path which is mentioned on
yeah,
DHCP option.
yes, and this is just using an MS-DOS, a short MS-DOS application. So you see what actually happens if we go back to our lab and we go, okay, DHCP discover, but with option 60. So one thing to note is that in the first scenario here that we mentioned, the first scenario where you're pointing to both DHCP server and the distribution point. In this scenario, what will happen if a normal client is just requesting for IP address? That request will go to both the DHCP server and the distribution point, but the distribution point will not respond because it's just a normal client that's requesting for an IP address. And how will he know
Okay.
whether it's a normal client or a client that needs to boot? How will he know? DHCP option 60. Remember, that is
Mm.
that is included. So if I go again to this discover and you scroll down, DHCP option 60, it's identifying itself as a Pixie client. So when the distribution point gets it, it's like, I have to respond to this. If you get a DHCP packet without this option, it's going to be like, yeah, this guy is just looking for an IP. DHCP server will respond. But if you get one with this option, Pixie client enabled, identifying itself as a Pixie client, like, oh, this guy needs to be able to boot. So I'll respond to this guy also. So in our own situation, we're using option 2, where we're pointing to the DHCP server, and we've configured the DHCP server to point to both. So DHCP server gives the offer, and of course within the offer, you see option 66 and option 67, where it's saying, hey, this is your TFTP server, and this is the file that you need to download. And then it requests for that, it acknowledges that, and then it's now talking. So now the client has an IP address. It's now talking to our distribution point saying, hey, can you send this file across to me, please? And then it begins to download that file. And then when it begins to download that file, it takes a while because you can, if you keep scrolling down, you can still see that it's still downloading this file. So you can see block 7 of this file, block 8, block 9, block 10, block 11 of the same file. So it's still downloading the file. Then eventually it finishes downloading the file. Yeah. And after it finishes downloading the file, look at what happened immediately after. Can you see that? DHCP again. Now, the client with an IP address is still talking to the distribution point. This leads me to another thing of if you have a firewall in between your client network and your server network, the port that needs to be opened. Number 1, port 67 and 68. Excellent. And that is used for what? DHCP, right? Yeah, but not only for DHCP, it's actually used also by the distribution point to supply the initial boot information. But then there's port 69. And what's that used for?
69 for Pixie?
For TFTP. Because the download of all the files, so when this guy is talking to this guy, he's going to be downloading everything via TFTP. So, and then port 4011, what is that used for? So let us see. So if we hold on, let's go back to our lab. Let's bring up Wireshark again. So you can see after it finishes downloading this WDNS MBP, it runs it. It's going to send the information to distribution point. But look at that. Here's the client talking to the distribution point. It's using a DHCP packet, but look at the destination point that it's sending it to, Pixie. Port 4011. So you can see that that's not port 67. Even though it's like a DHCP packet, the communication is using DHCP protocol, but it's using a different port now. So that port is called the Pixie port. It's the port where it's going to download all the boot information from. So it's going to use that port 4011. So that's why I've put this in the diagram to say, make sure that you have this port open in between. So this is the Pixie port, and you'll see what is it trying to do when it's like it's sending information about its architecture using DHCP to the distribution point. Distribution point is replying and acknowledging, and the next thing that it's going to start doing is it's going to start downloading the boot files, the files that are necessary to boot. And you see this file here, for example, this file for SMS pixieboot.com. You know, you're like, again, what's that talking about, right? SMS boot x64 pixieboot.com. So it's already downloaded WDS MBP. What is the pixieboot.com? What, why is it downloading this one? You say, right? Do you know the answer why it's downloading that one?
To start the booting, to detect the architecture of the...
So it's already detected the architecture using WDS MBP. It's communicated that back via DHCP to the server. So, but this Pixie, so then after it finishes the communication, it starts to download pixieboot.com, which is this one, which is another application. You know what that is referring to? If, for example, if I have a task sequence, I can make the task sequence required, or I can make it optional, available, right? So in other words, I think this one has already finished downloading. So let me go. So actually, I'll just run it first of all, and then I'll copy the drivers. So like, for example, I've downloaded this driver package. Let's run it. If I go run, all it's going to do is it's going to extract it into a folder somewhere. So it's going to extract it into this folder. So let me make note of that folder and then go next, install. So while it's extracting this one, let's go back to this one. So now, if I go back to config manager, I have my task sequence. I can go deploy this task sequence. What do I want to deploy?
You have two options, available or required.
Or required, exactly. And if in this case, if I want to, because this machine is not in SCCM already, I can deploy to all unknown computers, right? So that unknown computers can be able to boot to this. But then I can go and say required or optional. So if an advertisement is optional, yeah, then the user will get the option of press F12 to do a network boot, which is what I had to do. Do you notice I had to press F12? I'm not sure
Do you
if
know how to press?
did you notice that I had to press F12 when I was booting this client?
No.
So again, if I go back and if I go to reset it, so F12, yeah. So if I do, so watch what will happen. So are you watching what's going to happen? So I'm going to do a boot from LAN. It's going to come so fast, so you have to watch out to notice. If I go boot from LAN, you see it's going to ask me press F12 now. Can you see that? Not yet. The next thing is going to tell me press F12. Come on. It's going to be really quick, so you have to catch it when it happens. I just reset it. F12. So if I go LAN, you have to be really, really fast. Can you see F12? Can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I press F12 and then it starts. The reason why it's giving me that option, you know the reason why? Is because of this guy. Because this guy has run through my machine, ran it through. So I sent the information back for WDN and MBP, right, to the distribution point, right? The distribution point has scanned my machine in Config Manager and realized that the only advertisement that is available to my machine is an optional advertisement. Therefore, I'm going to send a program that will prompt the user to press F12. So that's all this program is doing. It's prompting me to press F12. Now, if I change that, carry on.
Because if you make the task sequence available,
Yes.
it will ask you. But if you make it required, it will go without asking to
Exactly.
press F12.
It will go without asking to press F12. And you know what's going to send in that case? It's going to send this other one, Pixie Boot N12. This one is for mandatory deployment. So I can actually test it if I go cancel here, look for an existing, look for which ones have I deployed. So if I deployed any one of them, hide deployment. Okay, not deployed, not deployed, not deployed, not deployed. Get one that's deployed, not deployed, not deployed. Okay, this one is deployed, but I've deployed it as available, right? So if I go here and I go deploy, and if I go browse and I go again, all unknown computers, next. Now you probably don't want to do this in production. Yeah, you probably don't want to do that in production. To say
it's not recommended to do it.
What?
You're saying it's not recommended to do it
No way. You don't want the required deployment. Absolutely
because
no way.
I did it. You know, when I practice on the Microsoft Virtual Lab,
Yeah.
it is required. Not available.
No, because what could potentially happen is, even though there are other safeguards you can put in place, but what could potentially happen is you have a required deployment and you make a mistake in your deployment. Maybe you deploy to existing machines. Maybe instead of saying I'm deploying to only media and Pixie client, right? That is machines that are using bootable disk and Pixie, and you make a mistake to say config manager client. So that means all your existing clients will get a required deployment. They will start rebooting themselves and start applying operating system. So required, whereas if you had just set it for available, even if you made a mistake, all they will get is a pop-up to say something is available. So
what's the option here? Only for Pixie? Only media and Pixie here?
Yeah.
What's the option?
So there's
when you make it available.
So there's so for both of them, whether available or required, you can say only available or required for only media and Pixie, only config manager client, media and Pixie, only media and Pixie. So you can select this one. But that's very important because just be careful about required deployment. You need to be, especially for operating system, you make a mistake to do a deployment that goes to your servers it wipes them out because it goes required. It's not going to prompt and say press F12 or anything. He's just going to go, boom, that's it. I'm deploying it. And I go schedule when this deployment will expire.
Okay, I want that.
Yeah, carry on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask you about one step that
Yeah.
I practice it on the Microsoft Virtual Lab.
Mm-hmm.
It mentioned to create a boundary for OS deployment
Mm-hmm.
with a few IP addresses, like 10 IPs,
Mm-hmm.
and this boundary,
Mm-hmm.
it will point to the distribution point. That means any machine
Yeah.
out of this boundary, he will not be able to install the OS.
So they can. Okay, you mean like no? If you bind a if you bind a distribution point to particular networks, what that means is this is my preferred distribution point. That doesn't mean that's my only distribution point. It means this is the distribution point that I'll prefer to use. But if my preferred distribution point doesn't have the package or the content that I need, I will be able to use other distribution points depending on my configuration. So to explain what that means in like a little bit more detail. So what that means is I can go, for example, let's say I have a software, an application, or this one here. So am I deploying this one already? I go deploy. Let's still leave it as available. Select any collection because we're not actually going to go through. But we go next. Config manager client available. Next. So commit changes at deadline. Okay. Then distribution point. So you see this one option here. Whenever you're doing any deployment, whether for software or operating system deployment, it says allow clients to use a fallback source location for content. So because I'm binding a distribution point to a network does not mean that's the only distribution point that they can use. They can use other distribution points in my environment, provided during the deployment I've enabled this. So, but the thing is, they will try their preferred distribution point first. If that doesn't have the content or it's failing for any reason, then if you specified this option, then they will try other distribution points that you've not bounded. But if you don't want them to be even trying another distribution point, then leave this. So if a content is not available on their preferred distribution point, then it will fail.
Okay, so it will be basically communicate to that distribution point.
Yes. So that means that's your
this option.
yeah. So that's kind of like your preferred distribution point. But the whole reason for that is, for example, configuration manager is not yet intelligent enough to detect locations. So you as an admin have to tell the configuration manager client, this is the distribution point that is in the rack next to you. This other distribution point is 2,000 miles across the world. So you have an office in Texas, you have another office in Hong Kong. So you have a distribution point in Hong Kong, you have a distribution point in Texas. So you have to tell the client in Hong Kong by going, when you set up your boundary group, by saying, hey, you know what, client in Hong Kong, this is your local distribution point. This is the distribution point that you should always try to use. Don't try to go and be using the distribution point in Texas, because then you'll be going over the MPLS that is a very slow link. So that is what that one is doing. But depending on per deployment basis, how you've configured that deployment, the client can try to use the distribution point in Texas if the one in Hong Kong has failed. Or if for some reason the content is not on the one in Hong Kong. But that is on a per deployment basis. You can configure each deployment to say, allow clients to use a fallback distribution point if the source is not available here, or you can say don't allow them, in which case if the content is not available on the distribution point in Hong Kong, it's going to fail. Yeah.
Okay, one more question, please.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, sorry. Carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we have VLAN. Okay.
Yep.
And we configure the option for DHCP and for WDS and Bixi deployment. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. all the machine and this VLAN will be able to communicate with DHCP and get the deployment or boot from Pixie. Okay. If I bring a laptop with which already has operating system installed, is there any chance that maybe it will get a new deployment?
So there are options. So one option is it depends on what you've deployed to. So for example, when you're deploying the task sequence, I have this task sequence, for example, I can deploy this task sequence to an existing collection. Yeah. So I can go this task sequence, maybe the machine is in this collection already. So I deploy the task sequence to this collection. And then the next place I can say only configuration manager client. What that means is that this will only be available to machines that have booted into Windows and have configuration manager client installed. In which case, if the user goes under Software Center, which is not available on this one, for example, but if the user goes under Software Center, if I go under this one, under Software Center, and I've made it available, they will see the operating system task sequence listed under Software Center. So that's one option. Yeah. So if I've made it available, if I've made it required, their machines will just reboot and start deploying it, depending on the configuration. So it depends. Don't you like that thing? Is this the new version of the? Is this the new version? Is this the new one they call Software Center 2.0? Because there's a new version of Software Center, There's a new version of, there's a new version of Software Center. Really, really cool. Like, I think I even 1 minute. I think I retweeted it. Really, 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 really cool. Twitter. It's my my account and scrolling down. Software Center 2.0. This one. Yeah, you can see. That's the new version of Software Center. That's what it looks like. So it's really cool.
Yes.
Yeah. so that's supposed to replace the application catalog, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, yeah. So then they'll see the deployment here. So, but that is if I've selected the option that make this available to config manager client. So I am deploying to a collection that the machine exists in, but this will only be available if they are logged into the machine. But if I say this is available if they are using Pixie boot or media, yeah, so they will get that deployment. So even though the machine already has an operating system,
but if the task sequence deployed on unknown collection,
yep,
there is no chance that any machine in this VLAN will get its deployment.
If they already have config manager client installed on them and they're already in config manager.
No.
Yeah.
In case if I deploy it for unknown,
yep,
and I mention only media and Pixie,
yep,
there is no chance for any client machine in this VLAN,
yep,
okay, will get OS deployment.
Unknown collection, yes. Yeah, for unknown collections, yes. So only machines that are unknown, that are not previously in config manager, will get that deployment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
and
but then,
no need to add the configuration of the Pixie boot option in on VLANs. Only in one VLAN that you will start the deployment.
So that's the best practice. So like for many people, they have lots of different kinds of client networks. Best practice is have a dedicated network for building the machines. So basically, you only have to worry about that single network whenever you need to make any changes. But let's say, like, if you have like maybe about 10 different client networks, maybe because of different floors, maybe your office have like floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, and you have different client networks, and you're using all of them for building systems. Then if you need to make any change, maybe your DHCP server has changed, now you have to go adjust 10 DHCP relays. But just have one network dedicated for building systems. Build a separate VLAN for building systems, and that way you only have one set of configuration to maintain. So that's like the best practice for that.
Okay. So create a separate VLAN.
Yeah.
configure that option and
Yeah.
keep the other away from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great one.
Yeah. But here's the other thing though, is that, you know, that network doesn't have to be like a super secure network or something like that. It can actually just be the same as it can have the same the same access as your normal client network, especially if you're
Yes.
going to be doing a lot of client setups. Like for example, like some of the things that I do with like my own task sequences, I'm using PowerShell scripts to add machine to different groups in Active Directory. That means my build network has to have access to Active Directory or whatever. You get the point. So because I have to be able to send an LDAP query to add the machine to, you know, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so it doesn't have to be like super special, secure stuff like that. Okay. So
Okay.
like with this one now, okay, let's see if the driver stuff has finished uploading. It's almost done. So we're gonna do a check on that. Yeah. So but now you know about this option. So option number 2 is where we now have to configure this one to point to option 66 and option 67. Now there's another option, option number 3. Option number 3 is when you have your DHCP server and distribution point
On the same
same
bus.
machine. Yeah. So that's another one to pay attention to because that's a different scenario. In this scenario, what do you have to do, Abdul? So back to our diagram. In this case, both distribution point and DHCP server are one machine. So basically we can go, let's get rid of this guy and say, hey, this guy is also gone out of the picture. So this one is DHCP server and distribution point. So what do you need to configure on your DHCP relay? Right? What do you need to configure? Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes.
Okay,
Can you
yeah.
hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So what do you need to configure on your DHCP relay in this case? So now DHCP server is out of the picture. DHCP server and distribution point are one server. What do you need to configure?
Okay, you have the same server in one machine.
Yeah.
So you will mention the DHCP server.
Yeah, exactly. So you just point.
But I guess in the task sequence, you have to mention mention that to not listen to the port
Excellent.
67, I guess.
Excellent. Yeah. So basically you're right. So in terms of, so again, your DHCP relay will just be pointing to the DHCP server / distribution point. But now you have to configure WDS on this to basically say, don't listen on port 67 because of course only one service can use one port on any system.
Yes.
So you have to say, don't listen on port 67 to WDS. And then you now have to say, you now have to configure the same thing that we configured earlier, which is you have to configure the DHCP options 67, option 66 and 67. So what you do in that case is you go DHCP, you go to this is your distribution, these are distribution point. Let's cancel this one. We have to go and say option, how many more trial days? Oh, I have 30 more days left, man. I have to do all my labs. I have 30 more days for evaluation. So I can go, okay, options 67 and 68. Oh, sorry. So this one, let's say this is both my DHCP server and my management point. So what I can do is I can go to, I'm not sure, I don't think I can do that directly from under the distribution point. Let's see if I can do that. I doubt that I will be able to do that directly from under my distribution point, but let's see. So I think I may need to open WDS to do this. So allow distribution points to respond to, so yeah, I can't do this from within the distribution point setting. So in that case, what I'll need to do is I'll need to open up WDS on this machine.
Yes, yeah.
And under WDS, I'll need to go under the WDS options of this machine. and I'll go under this one and I'll say do not listen on this one. And I can say for it to automatically configure DHCP options to indicate that it's also, or I could just go and manually configure it myself. So if I want, I can just, so I have to tick both this option and click apply. If this server is both a distribution point
on the same machine
and and a DHCP server. So that's the third scenario. So in this case, I'm hoping that this guy has already finished downloading. Yep, it finished downloading now. So let's do a sample driver import because you were interested in seeing that earlier. So if I go right click here and import driver. So what I'll do is I'll point to the location where I'm downloading on my driver. So again, it's recommended that you keep this organized. So you have like maybe you have something like maybe a new folder for Lenovo. Then then I can have maybe something like T440p. And then maybe under this, I can have maybe the date of this driver, because sometimes they do update the drivers. So I can have under the driver model, I can have 1604/2016, so that at least I know the date that this one was released or whatever.
Okay.
And then if I copy all the drivers here, or if I go Control X to cut them, Lenovo T440p, the date that was downloaded release, I can put them all there. So what I can now do is I can go SCCM sources, which is which is an hidden folder, which is like the source location. So LB SCCM2 / SCCM sources hidden folder, and if I go, I can browse to that and I can see my folder here. So I can select the whole folder. So you can see, look at this, they already added everything for me. I don't need to be downloading all the drivers manually. They've already had all this package. I just extracted it and I'm just uploading all of them to my SCCM, and I can just go select folder and I can go, hey, so it's going to say, if I find a duplicate driver, do you want me to import it and append a new category? So I usually just import the driver and append a new category. Then it goes, so it's going to validate the file permissions, and then it's going to list the drivers that are available. So this is one of the places, not the only place. This is one of the places where I can specify which drivers do I want to put in my boot images. And usually all network adapter drivers and all storage adapter drivers should go in your boot images, because you need to be able to have network connection when you're doing Pixie boot, and you also need to be able to format the hard drive and stuff. And you can figure this out easily. If you're doing a Pixie boot and you notice that it's failing and stuff, you can press F8 to bring up the, so let me see if this one has finished and downloading. Yeah, so I can press F8 here to bring up the command prompt, and I can do IP config. If I get an IP address, that means my network adapter is working properly.
Okay.
Yeah. If I do disk path and I list disk, if I can see my disk, that means my storage driver is okay.
Driver, okay.
Yeah, but if I can't see, maybe I can't get any IP address or so, I'll need to check that I've added the right, because what happens is, because a lot of things are happening, because you know what, once the machine downloads, the pixie.com, which allows it to press F12, or pixieboot.n12, which is required deployment. Once it downloads all that and downloads all the WIM files, and it loads all that, it's going to do another DHCP request, because now it's loading WinPE. So that is when it's going to need the drivers. So that's important, because after this, and if you keep scrolling down, a lot of OSPF. Wow. Okay, yeah, if I keep going down, I will see that it's going to do another DHCP request down there somewhere after it has finished downloading all the packages. So what's it downloading here? So you can see what's downloading here actually. You can see all the files that it's downloading, and there's no time to go through all the files, which is why I will advise you, look up online for the remote install folder and its content and go through that. And let me give you another some two links that I found really helpful on TechNet. So I'll post it in the chat window. These are really awesome links that you find really useful, because the guy went into a bit details about config manager. So if you look in the chat window, you'll see them. So these are very good links I found on TechNet that I've gone through them a lot of times myself. Because the guy just goes into like a good details about Pixie Boot, how it's working and stuff. So you can see deep dive Pixie Boot flow, SCCM 2007, 2012. So you can see here the one we're talking about WDS MVP, where it says this file detects the hardware architecture, and it's going to tell you at this point what could fail, what you need to check for. So you need to check that your machine is not part of the SCCM collection, or your machine is not in any collection and there's an advert for an unknown collection, because if there's no advert, it's not going to proceed. Client machine is not. So it tells you like what to look for, what to watch out for, the logs to look for. So those two links, I'll bookmark them. I have them bookmarked. I have them saved in my Evernote. So I refer to them from time to time.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I think we're almost running out of time. The other one I wanted to bring up is that one thing you have to be careful. For most organizations are beginning to use Secure Boot. And do you know what Secure Boot is?
Secure boot.
But yeah,
No.
because what happens? Okay, for example, I have an Hyper-V. I use Hyper-V in this lab environment, for example. So if I want to create a new Hyper-V machine, I can create a new Hyper-V generation 2 machine. If I go next, it says specify the name, test. Next, specify the generation. I can specify generation 1, generation 2. Say generation 2 says, this virtual machine provides support for features such as secure boot. Oh, look at that. Secure boot. So secure boot is kind of like a feature, if I can call it that, for UEFI. So you can use BIOS or you can use UEFI, right? You know those two processes. So you can use BIOS, which is kind of like the legacy legacy application that starts up your machine. So it starts up your machine, does the post process, and then hands over to the bootloader that's going to begin to load the operating system. So BIOS handles that. So now there's a new version of BIOS which is UEFI. UEFI. So UEFI,
UFI.
and the thing is that BIOS is a firmware, and BIOS is stored on the CMOS chip on the machine. So,
Yes.
but UEFI is not stored on the CMOS chip like BIOS. UEFI has its own separate chip. So it's called the UEFI chip on the motherboard. So there's a UEFI chip on the motherboard. So the BIOS that's stored in the CMOS chip, it's only a 16-bit.
CMOS,
It's only a 16-bit application, whereas UEFI is a 64-bit application. And that provides much more ability to it. It can access more memory. You can access the internet directly from inside UEFI and download stuff directly from the internet. You can do a lot of really cool stuff from UEFI. But one of the other things that UEFI gives to you, for example, BIOS will only allow you to use a boot disk of the maximum size of your boot disk is 4 gig for BIOS. For UEFI, the maximum is unlimited basically. If you have GPT partition also, so the maximum is like you can go beyond 2 terabytes and go for your boot disk. But one of the features that UEFI provides is this thing called secure boot, because when your operating system is loading, it's loading certain drivers too. Like you can see with WinPE, we insert our drivers inside WinPE, right? And when we insert our drivers inside WinPE, so you can see here, it scans that folder, and you can see drivers are not digitally signed. And you can see, I can see all kinds of drivers that has been enabled. So what I'll now usually do in this case, Abdul, is I'll go assign these drivers to one or more categories for filtering. This is important because what I'll do is I'll create a category and I'll say this is Lenovo T440p Windows 10 x64, so that I know what these drivers, what category they belong to, or which model they belong to. So I'll add them to this category. So that's very, very important because it will help you manage your drivers. So you add, whenever you import a driver package for a particular model, for a particular operating system architecture, add that category there. So then I can go next. Now you see this option where it says,
Drivers.
yeah, it says specify the package to add this driver to. So I'll create a new package also with the name of the model. So Lenovo T440P Win10 X64. And I'll specify the path where it's going to store that package. So if I go, in this case, so this one is driver sources. Instead of drivers, I'll go driver sources this time. And then specify this location and say use this location. So again, add a category for the drivers, right? But also add them into a package, because this one will, again, it will help you for the LB SCCM2 /, and I'll just get rid of this and specify hidden folder and click OK. And then if I go next, so this one is important because this is where it's going to say, okay, now you're importing this driver package with a lot of drivers in it. The imported driver is a network, so it's detected. So SCCM 2012 is good with this because it's detected there's a network card driver in this package, and there's a storage driver in this package, and it's telling me, hey, the imported driver is a network card driver or mass storage device driver, and might be necessary for a computer to start. So do you want me to automatically add this driver into this boot images for you? I can say, yep, add it into this boot image, this x64 boot image, because it's x64 drivers. If for x86, I select my x86 image, and then I can go next. So it's going to automatically add those drivers, and it's going to say, before computers can use the drivers, after I've added them into the boot image, I have to recreate and redistribute the boot image. Do I want Config Manager to do that for me, or do I want to do it manually by myself? I can just say do it for me. But the thing is that I usually do this on Friday evenings. The reason is because our service desk are usually building machines all through the week. I don't want to disrupt their boot image while they're building machines and stuff. So I'll usually do this at the end of the week, and then I'll go next, and then it's going to start importing the drivers. So that's how you import the drivers. So now it's importing the drivers into Config Manager. I can add a step in the task sequence that will say, remember what we saw last week? For model T440P, I will just specify one package. So now I don't need to be specifying all kinds of drivers. I just specify this new package that I'm creating, add all the drivers in this package for any model that is Lenovo T440P, and I'm done. So, which is like much more better and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, so that's where we'll probably stop for today. So I think that's all we'll be talking about, operating system deployment for our SCCM series. So I think we're still going to be talking about operating system deployment, but they're going to be special Hangouts. So they won't be, because there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to demonstrate. Things like the one that I mentioned last time about PowerShell is king, where you can automate your reference image creation. I would like to demonstrate
your automation.
Yes, exactly. So I would like to demonstrate all that, but they won't be in this series so that we don't, because otherwise we'll just carry on and on and on and on. Let's just conclude this series, and then, so any operating system deployment I'll be talking about will be either special Hangout, or I'll just do YouTube recordings. Okay, so any questions regarding that?
Very clear. Thank you very much. I appreciate your effort, and your explanation is very, very clear. Thank you very much.
No problems, man. It's all right. Yeah. So again, have a wonderful weekend, and then we'll see you again next time.
Okay, thank you.
Say hello to you. I can see your son in your picture, and your son and your daughter. So you say hello to your son and daughter for me. Okay. Speak to you later. Cheers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.